welcome today to HR Recruit's webinar about how to make the transition to a HR director. My name is Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by 4 experienced HR professionals, Tracy Webb, Nicola Reeves, Lee Boone and Christina Peterson. They're going to share their knowledge about what it is like to be a HR director. The structure of today is that I will be asking the consultants a series of questions, and then towards the end of the session, there is an opportunity for you to ask questions during the chat box at the bottom of the screen. There is no email facility, contrary to what Zoom may have informed you about. I'm now going to ask each consultant to introduce themselves and say a few words about who they are and how they became a HR director. Tracy?
Hi everyone, my name is Tracy Webb. I've been working in HR for probably more years than I care to remember, but for about 30 years, predominantly in the social housing and not-for-profit sector. I've actually very recently, as literally in weeks, just started my own consultancy and coaching business. So I was a HR director for about 1.5 years, and prior to that, I was a director of learning and OD also for about 2 years.
Okay, Nicola, over to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Nicola Reeves. I'm the Group HRD for a company called JT Group based in Jersey. Although we have offices in Denmark, UK, US and Australia. So we have about 600 people, but primarily located in Jersey. I've been in the role for 2 years now. Previously based in the UK, working, and a little bit like Tracy just said, I've worked in HR for more years than I really want to remember.
Sarah?
Hi everyone, my name is Lee Boone. I'm the Director of People and Organisational Development at the Chartered Institute of Marketing. I've also been in HR for many years. I did get my CIPD 25-year certificate, which was a bit of a wake-up call because I didn't think I'd realised it had been that long. But I've been HRD at CIM for about 3 years now.
Christina, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I'm Christina. I've been, like the others, in HR a long time, over 20 years now. I was the HR director for a large global company with 40,000 people. I looked after the UK and Europe. During the time that I was there for sort of, well, about 2.5 years, I think it was in the end. And a bit like Tracy, I have my own consultancy and I do HR and coaching, which has kind of been running for about 3.5 years now.
Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask some questions to the panel. As I said before, if anybody does have any questions that they want to ask any of the panel, we will cover these at the end. So please put these into the chat box facility and not through the email. So Christina, what is it like for you at the moment during lockdown?
Busy. So it's been really busy. I've been quite lucky in that the clients that I work with have all carried on throughout lockdown. So I haven't had anybody closing or anything like that, which has been really lovely. So yeah, it's been a really busy time for everyone because obviously we've had to all manage the introduction of furlough and everything that's happened in the last year. But it's also been interesting in other ways. So I do the first few times doing disciplinaries and grievances and things like that over Zoom were quite interesting. I'm still waiting for the day someone just decides they've had enough and shuts the laptop on me, but touch wood, it hasn't happened yet. So yeah, and actually in some respects it's provided more work. So I do some associate work with like a law firm and that. So actually with everything being on Zoom, it's actually meant I've actually been able to get more work from them because you can do it from anywhere in the country, whereas before it's obviously limited to where you could drive to. So yeah, it's been interesting times, swings and roundabouts.
Okay. And Tracy, what's it been like for you during lockdown?
Oh, well, yeah, I think same as Christina. I mean, the first obviously 6 months was completely bonkers and just really, really busy. And I think, you know, everything kind of went back to basics. But then I think we very quickly then started to really think about the culture and what this meant for the culture and how we could start to really kind of evolve the culture. And it kind of wasn't about doing something completely new. I think it was really building on what we'd already set out to do. So it really kind of accelerated it. It for me, pandemic and the lockdown has really acted as a catalyst for some of these things that we'd already been talking about already. Obviously, personally for me, it's kind of resulted in quite a big change. As you said, as I said earlier, I've kind of made the decision to actually set up my own coaching and consultancy business. I think, you know, change, it's like many people, it's enabled us to really think about what we want to do and what's important to us. And so there's, you know, it brings along opportunities as well as challenges. So yeah, for me, it's very busy starting up that new business, and there does seem to be quite a lot of work out there. There's a lot of need, and I think it's just a really super interesting time to be in our field right now, isn't it?
Sarah, how has COVID changed things for you in your current role?
I think it's been, I mean, it has been extremely busy for me and my team. We've been working flat out, and as Tracy was saying, that first 6 months especially, you know, really frantic. I think for us, it's really been about changing the way we do a lot of things, moving a lot of things in the business as a whole to virtual, and particularly some of our HR processes. Virtual recruitment and onboarding has been a particular challenge, and so it's just about trying, I guess, trying new things, not being afraid to try things. If things don't work, you try something else, and just keeping really agile and in touch with what the business needs.
And Nicola, has COVID changed things for you?
No, it's all still the same. Do you know what? I think one of the biggest things that we noticed when we were going through it, and bonkers is so much the right description, is how suddenly HR and IT, who are normally the kicking posts for everybody, became the really important central focus for everybody. They looked to us to lead everybody through, to provide the structures, provide the equipment. We were heroes for a short while. It was amazing. And I think from that, and going back to what several people are saying, it absolutely allowed us to accelerate our thinking, to go, do you know, this would have taken us 5 years plus of consultation, resistance of barriers. We've got a new way of working now that has worked. We can prove it works. We can prove that employee engagement scores are up. People's health and well-being it's improved. And we are in such a new landscape that, you know, we're continuing with this as a pilot. We're all able to be back in the office in Jersey, but we're continuing, and we're hoping this is the way of the future.
So Tracy, what was your background before becoming a HR director?
I think I probably started off on a fairly traditional kind of trajectory, started off in the NHS, brilliant grounding, kind of worked my way up slowly to be HR manager, and then got my first director role in a small housing association after about 10 years. I know what I do remember is that I didn't feel I was ready to be that director, and I'm sure a lot of other people will kind of relate to that, and it was my CEO who kind of saw something in me. So I think often it's that kind of definitely learned that you need that little nudge, or you need to kind of take that leap often before you feel ready. But then I had kids, I got made redundant for the first time, and actually then I knew I wanted to work less hours, so I took more of a downwards step and took on a fixed term role in learning an OD. And that was kind of a bit of a different kind of trajectory for me. And I quickly learned that was absolutely my passion. And so then I spent really the kind of next 10 years building my experience in that field. And before I then took on the broader role of the Director of People and Culture. And I think I was a much better director second time round, because of that kind of sideways step and that experience that I'd got within learning an OD and culture.
Nicola, what about you? What was your background before becoming a HRD?
Well, I actually specialised in learning and development and talent management. That's kind of my bag. and worked my way through. Now, I did consultancy for several years, probably similar to what Tracy's just said. I had a young child. It gave me more flexibility. Didn't work any less hours. I just had, well, we'll talk about the new ways of working now, but if you go back that long ago, it was about having the flexibility. And when you're a consultant, you get caught up in so many different things. You might go in and do an OD project or a talent project, and they go, oh, while you're here, we've got a bit of problem over there with people, or there's an HR policy that needs reviewing. So you get caught up in an awful lot of things, which gives you breadth of experience. So that when I returned to, I don't know what you call it, mainstream employment, I suppose, you've had a lot of experience within that field of time that you would never have had if you'd just gone from job to job.
And Christina, how did you end up becoming a HR director?
Just progressing through the ranks, really. So I started in sort of more hospitality and things. So I spent a lot of time, I love traveling. So I worked on the cruise ships for quite a long time, sort of late teens, early 20s, worked in the casinos, traveled the world kind of thing. And then I came back and ended up getting a hotel management. So I worked in hospitality, was a hotel manager, and that's really how I got into HR. But in terms of sort of making the leap to you know, becoming a HR director, it was from that point really. It was a standalone HR manager, then became a sort of field HR manager and getting involved in a lot of tribunals and stuff. Then I became a sort of senior HR manager, and then from there sort of made the leap into HR director. And kind of knew I was ready at that point, because at the company I was working, we'd literally done everything. We'd, you know, everybody's had a new contract. We'd sorted out all that, done all the housekeeping stuff, so everybody's personal stuff was up to date. We'd, you know, reworked benefits. We put training programs in. So I was literally at the point at that time that I was starting to twiddle my thumbs a bit, which it's not something I cope very well with. So that was really when I made the leap to sort of being a HRD.
And Sarah, how did you end up becoming a HR director?
Well, again, progressing through the ranks, but I knew quite early on in my career that I wanted to be in a position where I could really influence the success of the business. And I worked my way up through the ranks, spent about 6 years as a head of, and worked in different areas. So I planned my CPD and made sure that I'd got experience in a lot of different areas and that I could cope with a lot of different situations. So I worked in local authority, I worked in a charity, I'd also spent a number of years in sort of private sector SMEs. And so when I went to CIM, I started out there as the head of, but like I think it was Christina that was saying, luckily our CEO saw something in me and offered me the opportunity of being the HRD. And I think, you know, it's just because I really want to be involved. I just really want to be involved in the business as a whole. So I made sure that I took on projects, was willing to do whatever needed to be done, and just worked my way through and showed that I understood the business and could progress well.
And Tracy, what do you perceive are the main differences between a HR director and a HR manager?
I think it's such a good question. The quick and easy answer, I think, to that is it's the difference between function and strategy. So I think the biggest thing that you need and the biggest difference when you become that HRD is you're responsible for creating the people and culture agenda. And you need to be able to kind of articulate the vision for the people and culture agenda in a really compelling way. So you get that engagement right across the organization, but you also can create that ownership of that people and culture agenda, not just with you and your team, but with your senior executives and the board. And that's what will enable you to be really successful. But I think, as some of them have already started, the others have already started to talk about, I think it's about being able to understand the bigger picture. And so that's understanding the external environment, not just from your own kind of function, but for the business, and being able to talk their language. I remember that the CEO at Network Homes, where I forgot I was where I was director, you know, we were having a conversation about, you know, yes, she was, you know, concerned about people's well-being and engagement levels, but it was just one of a long list of things that she was concerned about and that was keeping her awake at night. So I think you need to really understand what keeps your CEO awake at night so that you can talk about that in their language, and you can really explain how the people and culture agenda adds value to the bottom line and how it really kind of will impact and address some of the challenges that the organisation is facing. And I think there's one other thing that I think is the biggest difference, the hardest, almost the hardest learning curve for me, which was actually learning to step back. I think you're not the functional expert anymore, and you need to create that space for your managers and heads of to kind of take that space so that you can step back and have a more strategic view. And I think actually that was the hardest thing for me to learn.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that's the thing I've found one of the most challenging things to do, is that actually going from being a head of and a manager, where I knew everything, I set up every system, I knew everything inside out. I've now got a team that knows that, but I don't always know those things. And it's about having that confidence to say, actually, you need to step away from that, you know, as Tracy was saying, and see that bigger picture, because ultimately what you're doing in designing the strategy and trying to take the business forward in terms of the people and the culture and, you know, those things, it's really important that you have that time away from that day to day to be able to see the bigger picture and look at the business as a whole and understand those external environments. You know, it's really nice to hear that it's not something that is, you know, that just I have been struggling with. I think, you know, it is really difficult to make that step, but it's really important.
Nicola, have you got anything to add to that question?
No, I'd say I'm nodding along here. I think Tracy put that so well and Sarah supported it. I mean, for me, if I looked at it, I think a head of or a HR manager, they're about delivering requirements, and they do it to the best of their expertise. They go and research it, they benchmark it, but they're told what's needed and then they create the solution. I think as an HRD, you're identifying what the requirement is in the first place. And you're doing that, back to what Tracy said, it's by scanning the internal environment, the external environment, looking at the trends. That's what you're expected to do. Know what's going on, know what needs to happen within the organization, and then turn it into strategies, mini strategies, or whatever it is, and sell them in. Let's face it, quite often with a bunch of commercial people sitting on the executive committees, somehow we've got to sell them that this is not some fluffy HR stuff. It's a real value to the organization. But we're the ones having to identify what it is.
Christina, have you got anything to add?
I think they've said it all beautifully, really. So I think, yeah, it is that just more of a leadership role and that strategic view, sort of seeing the holistic picture, if you like, and then having those managers underneath you to be able to sort of action, you know, the actual tasks and that leadership management distinction. I think when I think about when I was a HR manager to when I was a HR director, you know, some of the key things were like, you know, sort of having a team of 5 and then having a team of 30. And again, you can't manage that team of 30 individually, you know, so you have to be able to do that delegation piece, which the others have explained very well.
Okay. Sarah, what do you think makes a good HRD?
I think strong all-round business knowledge is really important. You can no longer be an HR person. You really have to understand everything. So as Tracy was saying, when you're talking to colleagues, you have to be able to talk their language. You have to understand how their part of the business works almost as well as they do. You have to be able to translate what it is you're doing into what works for them. So within CIM, we've got 4 main business streams. It's very diverse. We go from hospitality at one end to qualifications and examination things at the other, and they're very different. And I have to be able to think about strategies in relation to the hospitality business and then in relation to the other streams in the business as well. And to do that, I have to spend time with them. I have to get involved. I have to talk to them, ask them regularly what their challenges are, and just really get involved and be that trusted influencer, so that when I am trying to get something across that perhaps doesn't always land well first time, then they know that generally you do know where you're coming from, and you're not just trying to do a one size fits all solution. You know the business and you know what's going on. I just feel you can't stress that enough. It is at that level, it's no longer good enough just to be a good HR person. You have to be able to listen to the discussions. You have to understand the finances. You have to understand the figures. Make friends with your FD. Learn all about that stuff that may not come naturally, and just take on those challenges. I hear so many HR colleagues say, well, I don't do numbers. You can do numbers. You just haven't had the right training. You haven't had the right connections or the right people to help you, but you can do numbers. We do employment law. We do all sorts of really tricky stuff. We can do numbers. So it's really about that and stepping up.
Okay.
I'd just add to that, one of the first things I said to my team, and we traditionally had friction between finance and HR. First thing I did was go and make them our best friends. I worked on the CFO, they all worked with it, and the difference it made to understanding, getting information. Totally agree.
Christina, any thoughts from you about what makes a good HRD?
Oh, how long have you got?
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything Sarah said. I do think, you need that business knowledge. But I also think that, that shouldn't put anybody off, because when I first went to be a HRD, my business knowledge was minimal, really. I kind of knew a bit about the accounts and numbers. Well, I wouldn't say I had massive business knowledge, but I think, like the others have said just before, it's about trying to make friends with the finance guys and spending a bit of time with them and really understanding. So when I was a HRD, it was very much looking at the operations and all that sort of stuff. And I think being able, so I suppose I've been quite lucky because I've always come from a background where I was a hotel manager and stuff, so I was very into operations all the way through my career, where some people I guess are just quite office based and never really perhaps been that involved in operations. So I think if you're not involved in operations, or you're in an office and the operations are somewhere else, or like when you've got your shared HR services, I do think it's about how can you get more integrated with the operations and really find out about the running of things. But all that sort of stuff aside, in terms of what makes a good HRD for me is, you do need certain characteristics, if you like, and skills. So, one is resilience, because you do take a knock-in when you're at the top. I was the only female HR director for the UK and Europe, and there was a lot of very strong male ones. So you have to be able to stand your ground, you have to be able to take a few knocks and get back up and not get too upset. So, you do have to have that. And that is a skill. So I think I saw someone write a comment about imposter syndrome. And again, I sort of coach people on this, and imposter syndrome is something that is actually quite a good thing sometimes. We have this thing that imposter syndrome is a really, really bad thing to have. But actually it's good because it tells us that we're growing. It tells us that we're sort of, learning and doing new things. And actually it's the same chemical reaction in our body to excitement as it is to fear and things like imposter syndrome. So, it's about your mind frame then, and telling yourself, oh, actually, I'm not nervous. I'm excited to do things. And a good HRD, or even a senior person, any senior person, is about maybe having a bit of that imposter syndrome, but being able to see that on the other side of that imposter syndrome is something worth having or something worth delivering or whatever it might be. So, and by focusing on the end goal of what you want to be, so in this case, we're talking about HR directors, it's about people who want to be a HR director. It's almost about getting yourself out the way and getting over that. And there's loads of techniques you can do to do that, to get to your end goal. So I do think like you do need to be resilient. You do need to be able to overcome things like imposter syndrome. I think Richard Branson said something like, didn't he, that you should always say yes and work out how to do it afterwards. And actually, I do hold that in my head. You know, there's definitely been contracts and stuff that I've gone for. And when they've talked about something really complicated, and I have thought to myself, God, you know, am I going to be able to do this or whatever? And then once you start, you know, it's nowhere near as complicated. You know, you just got to get to the bones of it. So I do think, you know, you need those skills. You need to have those leadership. You need to have the people skills, because, you know, HRD is that leadership role. So you've got to be able to engage people and bring people on board. You've got to follow through. So, you know, people lose respect very quickly if you say things and then don't follow it through. So you need to be able to stick to your guns. And if you say you're going to do something, do it, or give explanations as to why that can't happen. So yeah, so off the top of my head, those are the things that you know you really do need to do. You do need to, again, something that some HR people perhaps shy away from a little bit, sort of Excel and spreadsheets and things like that. So you do need to have a reasonable knowledge of those things, because generally ops and finance is all spreadsheets and, you know, project plans and all that sort of stuff. So I do think, you know, the more skilled you can get yourself in those things, the easier you'll find it as well.
Okay. And Tracy, what do you perceive to be the pros and cons of being a HR director?
Just before I answer that question, could I just add one thing? I know we spent quite a lot of time on this, but I think it's almost probably the most important question. I think it's really important to know what you stand for, and you know, that self-awareness, and you know, great leaders don't set out to be leaders, they set out to make a difference. And I think that really shines through in really good HR directors. I mean, I've had managers who want to step up to be a HR director just because they want the status, or they think that's the next thing that they should do. But I think you need to be really clear what your why is and what difference you want to make. And that will really then shine through in being a really great HR director. So I just wanted to add that in. So I want to say the pros and cons of being a HR director, did you say?
Yeah.
For the pros, I think for me there's kind of almost two. One is having that broader influence. So for me, that was one of the key things that made me want to kind of step into being the HR, the people and director culture, because I could, you know, I've done quite a lot around great L&D initiatives, but they never seem to quite get embedded into the operation. So I had that kind of broader influence. But also, I think it's positional power. You know, and obviously you need to treat that with integrity. But I definitely found that when I took that step down, when I had kids and wanted to work part-time, it was so much harder to influence people and get people to, you know, to do things, or because I didn't have the job title. So I think there is a certain element of positional power that, you know, people listen to you because you are the HR director. And obviously that's not going to get you very far if what you start saying is a load of rubbish, but it's certainly, you know, use that positional power with integrity and to your advantage. Oh, sorry, then in the cons, so I don't know, is it a con? I'm not sure, but I think it's about accountability. The buck stops with you. So, you know, when there's been a control failure in payroll was definitely not my kind of specialism, but, you know, I needed to take full accountability for that with the board. So I think it's around accountability. And the other thing that I think I missed actually was quite often you become the sponsor of projects and initiatives rather than the kind of project manager. And I actually missed doing some of the doing. So again, I think that is worth kind of, you know, when you're really thinking about what you really enjoy, think about that, because you will be stepping back and you will be more the sponsor as opposed to kind of getting into the nitty-gritty.
Nicola, what do you perceive to be the pros and cons?
Well, the pros, I think, are definitely you've got the keys to the car. It's up to you if you're going to be a boy or girl racer with it. You've got the keys, and I think that's both exhilarating and terrifying when it first happens. They turn it, you know, the whole of HR is turned over to you. And I don't know about anybody else, but I was a bit like a kid in the sweetie shop. You know, what can we do? And I think those are the pros. And then you learn. I can remember my CEO going, Nicola, just concentrate to things. Don't try and do everything at once. So my team all went, thank God he said that. But, you know, it's really exciting place to be, to have the opportunity, and a bit like Tracy said, to make a difference that counts for the organisation, for the people. You're impacting other people's lives, hopefully having a positive influence, and as I say, adding value to the business, whether it's through retention, attraction, whatever it is, productivity, whatever it is. So, and you can see I'm getting more and more excited as I start talking. So there are the pros. The cons, boy, you're exposed. You are exposed. You are, several of us have now talked about it, with usually sitting with a bunch of men. HR is primarily female dominated. Apologies to any gentlemen who are sitting on the webinar. That's not meant to disengage with you. We need more men in HR, but predominantly we are women, which means we are having to learn to fight, put our case forward in a man's world. HR is traditionally seen as fluffy, something we need. And I think the cons are, I mean, certainly at the beginning, I felt it was a constant battle. You know, you have to find your position, you have to get your voice, you have to get your gravitas. You only do that through producing the value things in the first place, and then it starts getting easier. And I'll relate very strongly, sorry, I can't remember if it's Christina or Tracy who talked about imposter syndrome. Christina, it was you. And I think there is, if you talk to a lot of senior HR women in particular, and again, I'm not excluding the men, I think a lot of women will relate to that, and it's a barrier, a personal barrier you have to get through.
Okay. Christina, what have you learned about since being a HR director?
I think I learned just how resilient I was, actually, because during the time I was a HR director, it was a really, really big challenge. It was a third-party telecoms company, so you know everything's down to the wire. There's contracts 2p in and out. They've just won a couple of big contracts with a large-scale recruitment, so hundreds of people coming in and out. So I think in terms of, and it was, you know, it was just a massive jump into the deep end. So I think in terms of things I've learned about generally and about myself is that, you know, you do need to have that sort of organisation, and you know, a sort of caveat this with, it depends what size of organisation you're going into be a HR director of, because obviously if it's a lot smaller, then you know it might be a little bit more pleasant to start with. Do you know what I mean? Whereas when you go into a massive one, you know, you are dropped in the deep end and you do have to pick it up pretty quick. So I think, yeah, just about that sort of resilience, and then learning as quickly as you can about the company, the way they work, the operations, the finances, getting to know your team. Like I say, I had quite a large team in the last one, which was not just HR people, but recruitment people and training people. So it's about being able to bring all that together. So I think, and it can also be really lonely at the top. So when I was a HR director, the sites were kind of spread out across the UK and Europe. Most of the other directors were kind of based around London. The head office was in London, and I was obviously in the northwest. And there were a couple of other directors in other places, but most of them were in London. So there are times where you do feel quite isolated. And I think, you know, looking back, and especially, you know, now I do a lot of exec coaching and that, but I wish I'd maybe thought about that at the time, because I think I would have found it really useful to have someone to sort of sound off, or, you know, to have that person there that I could really either just offload or get advice from, because I think that is probably one of my biggest learnings, is that when you're trying to do everything on your own, that is when you start heading towards burnout. And, you know, I like to think I'm pretty quick, I'm pretty on it, I'm pretty resilient, but towards the end of my time there, I was definitely sort of feeling the burn. So I think that's probably one of my biggest learnings.
And Sarah, what about you? What would you say you've learned about since being a HRD?
I think, like Christina, I've learned a lot about myself and how resilient I can be. I learn regularly. I think especially in the last year, we've all learned lots of new things that maybe we hadn't intended learning. And I think actually it's really important not to stop learning. Don't think that because you are at HRD level, you know it all. There are lots of great people out there that you can always learn from. There are lots of great resources. So, I'm a big fan of good planned CPD. Make sure that you're really planning your learning, that, you're not guilty of making sure everyone else has got a development plan, but that you haven't yourself, that you know where you're going, that you know your gaps. No one can be good at everything, but knowing where you are and knowing where the skills gaps are can be really useful. And I think the other big thing that you really need a lot of at this level is emotional intelligence. You have to be self-aware. You have to be honest about who you are. Don't lose yourself, but understand how that makes you interact with others, how it means that you work, how you influence, how you do things generally, and understand that, the way that your self-awareness is really important. I've worked with so many leaders who are just not aware at all, not self-aware at all, and it makes it really difficult. And I definitely didn't want to be someone who didn't know my own shortcomings when I was talking to other people about theirs, really. So yeah, lots of things there.
Tracy, what do you think is a measure of success as a HRD?
Oh, I think there's probably the obvious ones, like, having a good set of KPIs, maybe even external recognition with external awards. But for me, I think it's two things. One, it's around the culture. What's the culture really feel like in your organization? What's it really feel like to work there? And what are your people saying? What are people saying on Glassdoor? And sort of linked to that, I think then it's about ownership. So does the people and culture agenda sit solely and only with you and your team, or actually is it owned more broadly by the whole organization, particularly by the board and the senior leadership team, but by the managers? And I think for me, that's the kind of the real kind of, if you can get that ownership out in the organization, that's really when you get liftoff. So for me, if I see that ownership is out there, I know you've got a good HRD in place.
Nicola, what do you perceive to be a measure of success?
This is glib, but a happy CEO. Basically, if my CEO is happy, you kind of know you're doing the right things and you're delivering what he needs to report back to the board. And that's so many things, but if something goes wrong, it will land up on his desk. So a measure of my success is that nothing ever goes anywhere near him. So.
Okay. And Sarah, is there any sort of specific development that you would encourage someone to undertake prior to becoming a HRD?
I think aside of the sort of the knowing your business and the sort of general business skills, I don't think there's any one thing, because it is different for everybody. But I think going back to what I said before, look at your skills, measure yourself against things, possibly like, the CIPD map, and look at what you want to be and what sort of sector you want to be in, what sort of industry you want to be in, or that you are in. And identify what your learning journey needs to be, because it will be different for everybody. We've all got different gaps and different skills that we need. So aside of that, general business stuff, think about your own development journey. Also, tech. I think that tech is something that, we really need to be much more open to as HR people. I sometimes see quite a resistance to tech, and it can be a great tool for us. It can really help us and make things so much easier, but I do see a bit of resistance to it. So understanding that and understanding the tools that are out there that can make things better for HR and for organisations is really important as well.
Christina, have you got anything to add on that? Any sort of development you would encourage people to uptake before considering being a HRD?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Sarah says. I think that, you know, the more prepared in terms of like business skills, so just making sure, you know, you don't have to be an accountant, but if you can understand the basics of P&L sheet or your accounts, then, you know, they're things that are really going to help you, making sure like your Excel. So, you know, there's a lot of people in HR, you know, like I say, I've had many teams that have struggled with Excel or kind of shied away from big spreadsheets. And you know, it's that whole thing that, let's say, HR is seen as fluffy and not particularly data driven. So the better you can be with data and being able to manipulate data, whether it's, you know, retention numbers or how much you're spending on recruitment or whatever, and be able to sort of put that, you know, someone once told me, you know, if you want the finance director to really buy in, this was at a time when we were trying to get loads of people, you know, I was sort of saying, look, we can't recruit this amount of people with this little staff. And the ops director sort of said to me, put it in his language. So we actually built a calculator and we put in, like, you know, how long an interview took, you know, how long it took to do all these things. And then basically, long story short, at the bottom, it pumped out how many people you needed to do that level of recruitment. And obviously, over the months that we were going up and down with recruitment, that number went up and down. And he couldn't argue with that then, because it was in his language, it was data, it wasn't opinion or, you know, Chris just thinks she needs more people, but she can cope without them. So I think the more you can manipulate data and sort of be able to do that type of thing, the easier you will find it. And the flip side, I think, it is around that behavioural piece. So as Sarah said, sort of really understanding where your own gaps are. We all know the things that we're not very good at or we don't enjoy. So even if you don't enjoy it, just making sure that you're quite good at it and you can do it. So, you know, whether that's coaching, getting coaching, or whether it's doing particular programs, so that, you know, if you're maybe not a great strong people leader, that you know, do some more in that sort of area. If you're somebody that doesn't particularly like conflict and you shy away from it, well, unfortunately, you're going to need to be able to do that as a HRD. So again, that might be something that you're looking into and how you can overcome that. You know, if you know you really suffer with imposter syndrome, then, you know, look at ways that you can get around that, or enlist coaches or go on training courses to do that. So I think it's about really doing that self-awareness piece and seeing where the gaps are and trying to fill it in as best you can. And you're never going to be like totally prepared for every outcome possible. But I think if you've got those basics and you've done that work, then you're kind of in a quite strong place.
Okay. Tracy, is there anything that you wish you'd have known before you started your HR journey?
I found this question really hard. I'm not really sure. I mean, the only thing that really springs to mind for me is that think about the organisation as much as the job that you're going for, because I probably had my most valuable experiences when I took a step down, but went into a phenomenal organisation that had an incredible CEO and executive director who I learned way more from than if I'd maybe been going for that job that wasn't in such a great organisation but was a more senior role. So I think organisation as much as role when you're kind of looking for your next career move. Nicola,
anything that you wish you'd known before you started?
Well, I totally agree with Tracy. One of the questions I've always asked in interviews is, what's the culture of your organisation? Because I just think you'll get more from yourself in the right organisation than going for the wrong one just for the sake of a step up.
Yeah.
What do I wish I'd known when I started in HR? Well, for a start, HR has changed hugely during my career. HR is not the profession it was 20, 25 plus years ago. So I suppose nobody could have told me back then what it would be like. But I think the one bit of advice I would give to anybody starting out on their HR career today is you need to understand that your role will change according to the organisation you are working in. The raison d'etre for HR is different for each organisation. whether it's the engine room, operational excellence, whether it is a strategic contributor, wherever you work, it will be defined by what the company wants from HR. So you could be transactional, you could be strategic. And that would be my biggest bit of advice. If you're going into an organisation, find out what HR's role is in that organisation.
Okay. Christina, what advice would you give to someone thinking of transitioning into a HRD role?
That kind of relates to what we were talking about before. Just try and be as prepared as you can. I think, you know, it's common sense, but obviously different HRD roles are going to be different in different organisations and depending on the size. So like in a smaller organisation, it's not going to be as big as a headache as in a global organisation. So I think, you know, if you're new to it, just maybe that's something to bear in mind. I never really thought about that before I went for a HRD role. And, you know, perhaps I should have thought about it a bit more because I was working every hour God sent. But yeah, I think in terms of preparation, it's just about really knowing those skills gaps and taking those steps to overcome it, having that resilience and perseverance, and just going for what you want and not being scared about it, because you'll learn as you go, you'll learn on the job. There's nothing that anybody else can do that you can't do if you put your mind to it. So I think it's about having the right mindset as well.
Okay. Sarah, how do you develop yourself?
So I do lots of different things. I read a lot. I make sure I listen to good people. I surround myself with a good network of professionals who I listen to, and you know, I discuss things with. I'm a great fan of TED Talks and just getting a different perspective on things. I think it's very easy to become quite one-dimensional when you're in an organisation at a senior level, and it's really good to just sometimes challenge your thinking and challenge what it is that you think is the right way or you know, how things should be. So I just try and make sure that I get different opinions and respect those who I think know more than I do. There's always someone out there who knows more than I do, and I'm always happy to listen to them. I think, you know, previously in my career, I found some networking events a little bit difficult because it was very competitive and very, you know, and very sort of, let's all pitch up against each other and see who's the best. And as women in business, we can't afford to do that. We have to work together because we are already, you know, fighting against, as we were saying, you know, quite a male-dominated environment in some cases. So it's really important that we support each other, stick together, and really be there for each other when we need. And I think that's really important in your development. Get yourself a good network of great people who, you know, can help you through when things get a little bit tough.
Has anybody got anything else to add to that question?
I would probably add, get a good coach.
Yes. Yes,
I
didn't mean to say that, sorry.
Yeah, I think that has really helped me no end. And just interesting what you're saying, Sarah, about reading books. If anyone's like me, I would always have a massive pile of books that I somehow never quite found the time to always read, and would beat myself up for not finishing. And I've just recently signed up to Blinkist. So that's my little tip, actually. So that summarizes non-fiction books. And do you know what? It's been a complete revelation for me. So now I can really get the, you know, the kind of essence of the of a book so much easier. And then if you're interested, you can read it. Anyway, this is not a plug for Blinkist, but you know, and do what works for you, really, because we all learn differently, don't we? And sometimes we think that we should be doing something, but find what works for you. How do you learn best?
Okay, so the final question, I'm going to open this to everybody. So Christina, what are the next career options once you've become a HRD?
Yeah, I think the world's your oyster, as long, you know, just knowing what you want. So I think if you're in a smaller company, there's always options to become a HRD in a different company. Every company is so different and it's going to have their different challenges. Obviously, if you go from a UK-based company to a global company, again, that presents different opportunities and things. So I think there's things sort of in that direction. I mean, like myself, I left and opened my own consultancy. So you can do that, and I do HR and coaching and training, which I absolutely adore. I think a lot of senior people, HR directors, do tend to go down sort of coaching or L&D sort of type routes. And I think for me, it's because I kind of missed it. So I know as a HR manager, I was coaching quite a lot of the senior people. And then when I actually became a HR director, I was doing a lot less coaching because, like I say, you've been that strategic person. So you don't really have the time or the opportunity to do that. And it's, you know, it is quite fulfilling. So I think from what I've seen, those tends to be the type of routes. I've also heard of people who just stepped down and done something completely different because they just don't want that level of stress or hard work or whatever anymore. So I think there's lots of different options there.
Sarah, what would you say are some career options?
Well, I think as Christina was saying, you can, you know, being an HRD in different types of sectors and different types of organisations will bring you different challenges and new things. If you work for a smaller organisation, you can have a much closer relationship with people within the business and get much more involved. If you go into a larger organisation, then it's going to be a very different proposition. I think there's also things like non-exec work. You know, you can get involved in boards as a non-exec so that you can, you know, share some of your knowledge with perhaps charities or organisations that, you know, would really benefit from that. And consultancy, I think, is a great option, and it's really great to see that, you know, people are going out there and starting these consultancies with having had the knowledge of the background of working in HR at a senior level and taking that out to people as a consultant. I think is great because, you know, we all need really good coaches, and you know, the more that we have out there, the better, really, the more choice we've got.
Tracy?
Ditto what the others have said, but another option, I guess, is start to take on a broader role. So at Network, we actually pulled together people and technology. So I had an executive director then of people and technology, which actually worked brilliantly, particularly with the digital transformation organizations are going through. So you know, you often see HR directors then become corporate services directors. So I think there's that kind of growing the remit of your role. But like Christina, I mean, I personally have chosen I felt I had a good story to tell from my organisation. We've really transformed the culture, and I wanted to be able to share some of that. So I've chosen to go down the consulting and coaching route.
Okay. Nicola, anything else to add before we get on to questions?
I totally agree with everything people said. I hope somebody was making a list there. A couple of others, author and speaker. I think those are two things that an HR director can certainly do alongside their role, actually. Third sector. I mean, that's certainly something I would think of as a next career step, which would be about giving something back. And then when I was being coached a few years ago, and I was kind of going, oh, I don't know which way to go now. And the coach said, well, actually, Nicola, a bit like you said about different director positions, he said, but you could also be looking at a CEO position in a different type of organisation. You know, according to the industry, there's nothing to stop HRDs making that step.
Okay, so if anyone's got any questions that they want to put to the panel, we've already got a few questions that people have entered into the chat box. So if you do have any questions, you know, please feel free to add them. I'm just reading one here from Caroline. She's over in Ireland, and she's saying in Ireland you need to be a HR business partner to get to a HRD. So she's wondering what advice you would give to sort of challenge the assumption that you have to be a HR BP to add value. Anyone want to answer that?
Well, I'll lead it and then others can jump in. I'm not sure that I would agree with that at all. And I suppose that's because I haven't come down the HRBP route personally. I came through L&D and talent, as I said earlier, but I was never a dedicated HRBP. And sorry, I'm an HRD. So I would challenge the assumption. I do think you need a breadth of experience and maybe some depth in at least one HR subject, but I wouldn't agree it needs to be via the HRBP route.
I don't either. I've never been a HRBP. I just went from hotel manager straight to HR manager. So yeah, I don't think you need to. I think in some businesses, I have known HRBPs almost be higher than some managers that I've known. So I think it depends on the organisation and how it's structured. So, you know, you kind of need to, I suppose, if you're not HRBP already, look at what they do in their day-to-day role and why the organisation feels that you need those skills or you need to have that title. And, you know, and then put forward your case as to why you feel that's not the case. And again, you know, I always remember the advice that was given to me is about making sure you can put it in other people's language and how they will like to receive it. And it's I do a lot of NLP and we do that same sort of thing. So if you know your CEO or the person you're going to be talking to likes like spreadsheets and stuff, put it all in a spreadsheet. If you like a presentation, do a little presentation. So make sure you put in the information in the language they're going to be receptive to. And if, you know, if they're not a fluffy person, don't be fluffy about it, get straight to the point, all that sort of stuff, and really think about how you're positioning the information. But it's about making your case as to why you don't feel that's the route you necessarily have to take.
Okay. Lindsay has put a question to say, Tracy, you spoke about not feeling ready for your first HRD role. How do you and other members of the panel deal with imposter syndrome and confidence in an environment where you're being questioned and challenged on a daily basis?
I mean, for me, I think it's definitely about having a good coach or a good mentor. Or, I mean, my husband actually acts as a good coach for me often. So being able to actually kind of get out whatever it is that's going around in your head, so you can kind of step back from it and see the bigger picture and kind of start to understand your patterns. And you know, that I think one of the brilliant things about the pandemic has been the mainstreaming of well-being. And I have to say, you know, really focusing on your own well-being is the key to it all, really, because that helps you to build your resilience, to help you kind of recognize what are some of those kind of maybe negative patterns that you might have, so that you start to kind of see what those patterns are and can kind of step back from them. But definitely good coaching and mentoring can really support you with that.
Okay. Helen has put, how would you briefly articulate what HR primarily contributes to the bottom line?
Well,
Anyone want to answer that?
I'll have a go at this one. I would say if you don't have the right people in place and engaged and delivering the way they need to, there won't be a bottom line. Because you won't be doing what's needed to be done. Without people, you don't have a business. So it's our job to make sure the right people, the right place, the right skills, the right levels of happiness, all of those things. And that's our contribution to the bottom line.
And just to add to that, I think it's also about, you know, talking about recruitment figures and training figures and things like that. And actually, if you're recruiting the right people, you're training them in the right way, you've got the right culture, you're going to have less turnover, therefore less costs and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's about, you know, really making your case again as to the sort of elements that HR sort of look after. And at the end of the day, it's all about people, isn't it? So, you know, at the they contribute to the bottom line by having people that are doing the job, you know, hopefully well, if you're recruiting the right people. So I think that's your case.
Okay. Emma's asked a question to say that by the time you're a senior HR, you've perhaps, done what you need to with CIPD and got a master's, possibly a postgrad. Is there anything to be had from a qualification point of view, such as maybe a CMI or an can't get my teeth in, ILM, to perhaps support your first leadership position?
It really depends on what you need. Don't necessarily look at qualifications in the way of just gaining a qualification. What is it that you need to learn? What is it where is the skills gap? What is it that you don't yet know enough about or are confident enough in? So qualifications, great, that additional learning, great, but is it going to give you what you actually need? So again, going back to that development plan, that emotional intelligence, and looking at what it is that you need to develop before you decide exactly where you might need to go in terms of further quals.
I mean, a tip I'd give, we've all talked about needing this whole range of understanding, finance, strategy, all the rest of it. One of the things I'm doing is the IOD certification, and it covers all those different subjects from a director's point of view, not just an HR point of view, to give that level of understanding.
Okay, thank you. Elaine has asked, specifically for Christina and possibly the other panellists, how to build your resilience. She's put some knocks are much harder to take than others. Anyone got any quick tips?
Yeah, I think some knocks are harder to take than others, and I think it's about, because I could probably talk about an hour on this, but I think it's about really understanding why they've hurt you or upset you and finding out the root cause. And is it because you feel people think you're not good enough, or and then it's about working with what comes out of that. So I think resilience is a skill. It's not something people might be slightly more adept at it than others, but it's a skill. So the more you practice it, the more resilient you will be. The more times you get knocked over, the more times you get up, the easier it becomes. Michael Jordan is the famous basketball player for taking the most, winning the most amount of shots, but he's also most famous for losing the most amount of shots. He's just took the most amount of shots. So it's all about getting knocked down and getting back up again. And actually, if you're getting into a pattern where you're constantly being challenged about the same things, how can you respond in a different way? How can you come at it from a different angle, and see if you can spark a change by approaching it in a different way, maybe.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time, so I'll just try and merge a couple of questions into one. How do you build trust with the leadership team and sort of establish yourself as a leader at the leadership table?
Do what you say you're going to do and results.
Yeah.
I think it's about like promoting yourself and your work, and doing what you say you're going to do and creating change and creating results, and that's how you kind of build your credibility.
Yeah, deliver
And talk
their language. Yeah,
talk their language, deliver, and tell them what they're going to get from it. What's the value?
Okay, so I'm just conscious of time, so we'll conclude the session. There is quite a few questions that people have asked around sort of influencing at sort of key stakeholders. We're actually running another webinar on that in another couple of months, so I'm going to be emailing people anyway, so please feel free to sign up to that. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to our panellists, and also a massive thank you to our listeners. I will be putting a post on LinkedIn after the event and CCing the panellists onto the LinkedIn. So the best way of contacting any of the panellists here would be via LinkedIn. I'm going to send out some correspondence, and I will put the post on LinkedIn, so please put a comment onto the LinkedIn post. For those of you who are on LinkedIn, this would be really appreciated. And also, if you do want to request a copy of the recording, then please put a comment on that LinkedIn post. We don't charge for these events, so adding your comment will increase the awareness of our brand. We've also got a guild networking group as well for HR professionals. It's a bit similar to WhatsApp, where members can ask questions, network and share ideas. So I will send out a link on the email. So, you know, if you haven't done that, please join. And if anyone is recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit and FD recruit within the group. So finally, just to say a massive thanks to the panelists and a massive thanks to the listeners, and I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Thank you.